Let us pray. Oh God, may the words of my mouth and the meditation of all of our hearts be acceptable in your sight, you who are our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. Well, I was a theater major at the University of Hawaii at Manoa in the late 80s. Kennedy Theater was the name of the venue in which we performed. It was a beautiful, beautiful theater. I was in a total of 4 campus productions in my 2 years of being a theater major. One of those shows was a stylized 500-year-old Japanese comedy form of theater called Kyogen. And we not only performed at the Hawaii Kennedy Theater, but we also were fortunate enough to be able to travel to Japan and perform in Tokyo. I was also cast in the world premiere of the children's playwright Arne Harris's Monkey Magic, which was based on folk tales from Chinese culture. Fun fact, it was the world premiere, so if you ever find a copy of the script of Monkey Magic, or if you get an anthology of Arne Harris's plays, they will have the original cast in there, so my name will be in there as part of the world premiere. By the time I declared my major as theater at UH, I'd already discerned God's call in my life into ministry, so I knew that I would be, when I graduated, going off to grad school and get my Master's of Divinity in order to study to become an ordained minister, which meant I knew that I didn't have to make a career in theater, and in college I could just enjoy all aspects of it without worrying about how I was going to be able to pay the bills down the road. Well, fast forward 33 years later, and our very own Margaret Wassner was directing a local production for Cedar Street Theater. The show was Joseph and the Amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat, a Tim Rice and Andrew Lloyd Webber musical from the early 70s. I didn't realize it was that old. Of course, it was Donny Osmond's portrayal of Joseph in the mid-90s on Broadway that made it popular. And then I never expected to be on stage again, but I found myself auditioning when Margaret asked if I would consider being in the cast. And I was Reuben, the oldest of Joseph's brothers. I was almost one of the oldest in the entire cast as well, but it worked out. I had such an amazing time. It was a lot of fun. Thank you to all of you that came to watch the show back then. In fact, I had so much fun. Margaret is directing a new show called Bye Bye Birdie. I mean, it's not a new show. It's an old show, but a new production of it. And she asked me to audition. I did. I was cast in it as well, so that'll be in mid-September. Stay tuned for more details. But the Joseph saga is one of the more epic storylines in the Bible. In fact, this dreaming brother with a coat of many colors who's sold into slavery by his jealous brothers, and eventually, after spending time in prison for a crime he didn't commit, rises to the rank of second in command to the leader of Egypt, Pharaoh himself, saving millions of people from starvation. I guess I should have said spoiler alert before I just shared the entire plot line for the next 6 weeks. So I guess you could just check back in 7 weeks if it doesn't interest you, or you can stick around, and this new series is called Dreamer, the story of Joseph. And even though it is a story we're somewhat familiar with, we're going to find that there's a lot of details that we may not have known or remembered. Now, before we jump in, I do want to put a different scripture verse in the forefront of our hearts and minds. In fact, we're going to come back to this over and over again throughout this 6-week series, and that's from Romans 8:28. Paul writes, "We know that all things work together for good for those who love God and who are called according to God's purpose." Now, anytime I use this passage or this scripture, I always preface it by saying, notice it does not say that everything that happens in your life is good. And it doesn't say God caused everything to happen in your life as it's happening. I firmly believe what happens in our life are based on the choices we make or the choices that others make that impact us as well. But I do believe this verse is saying that whatever happens in our lives, that God can use that, even the worst of circumstances, for good. And we'll see that that gets played out over and over and over again in this Joseph saga. The story of Joseph comes to us from the very first book of the Bible, the book of Genesis. It's the Joseph story is the longest cycle of stories in Genesis. It encompasses 10 chapters, and by most accounts, it's the longest sequence of stories written by one author. Most Modern biblical scholars believe that there were a number of writers that combined to make the stories that we have in Genesis. And biblical scholar after biblical scholar that I read this week had nothing but praise to heap upon the Joseph series. In fact, Kathleen O'Connor says, often called the Joseph novella, the chapters have the force of a short story or novel. Walter Brueggemann writes, the Joseph narrative is a sustained and artistically crafted statement of considerable literary finesse. It is a fabulous story. If you're unfamiliar, you're in for a treat. Let's jump right in. Genesis 37, beginning at verse 1. Jacob settled in the land where his father had lived as an alien, the land of Canaan. And this is the story of the family of Jacob. Now, the book of Genesis begins by recounting the story of the relationship between God and the people of Israel. From the very beginning, the creation of everything, to the promise of Abraham that his descendants would become a great and powerful nation. Abraham's main son was Isaac. Isaac's boys were Esau and Jacob. And now our series takes an intentional look at Jacob and his sons, the sons who would become the 12 tribes of Israel down the road. And our storyteller begins by letting us know that Jacob settled in the land where his father had lived, the land of Canaan. Now, Jacob's own story is one of great drama and intrigue. He was born the younger of a set of twins. Jacob grabbed, he deceived, he plotted his way into a whole lot of blessings that weren't originally intended for him. And along the way, he ends up having 12 sons, 1 daughter, 4 different wives, all who managed to stay living together under the same tent, so to speak, as one big, kind of, sort of, not really happy family. Verse 2. Joseph, being 17 years old, was shepherding the flock with his brothers. He was a helper to the sons of Bilhah and Zilpah, his father's wives. And Joseph brought a bad report to them, to their father. Now Israel, Jacob's name, loved Joseph more than any other of his children because he was the son of his old age. And he had made him a long robe with sleeves. But when his brothers saw that their father loved him more than all his brothers, they hated him and could not speak peaceably to him. Now, all of the promises that were originally made to Abraham now pick up here with the unlikeliest of characters, Joseph, this 17-year-old who, out of this baker's dozen of an offspring, just so happens to be his father's number 1 favorite. Now, mostly because he was the eldest of 2 children born to his favorite wife, Rachel, who unfortunately died while she was giving birth to her second child, Joseph's younger brother, Benjamin. Michael E. Williams, in his Storyteller's Companion to the Bible, mentions that all of Jacob's sons technically were shepherds. That's the family business. It's what they did. But Joseph's chief distinction among the shepherding sons is he is also a tattletale. We are told Joseph brought a bad report of them to his father. Now, remember, this was the original blended family before we started talking about blended families in the 21st century. 1 dad, 4 moms, 13 kids, and Joseph was one of 2 born to his favorite but now deceased wife, Rachel. The chances that Joseph would be spoiled by his father are pretty much at the 100th percentile right there. Now, the Hebrew phrase, an evil report, would be the same term used a few books later in the book of Numbers, chapter 13. You may remember that after Moses led the people out of slavery and captivity in Egypt, they wandered around in the desert for a while, and at the beginning of that wandering, they made it to the edge of the promised land, Canaan, and they sent 12 spies, 1 from each of the 12 tribes of Israel, in to see what the land looked like and if they could take it. And 10 of the 12 came back and said, no way. There is no way. And the report that they came back, that's the same language that's used here, a bad report. A bad report about the land and a bad report about the brothers. Now, we don't know what that bad report was. We don't get any details. But for whatever reason, Joseph is now the family narc. And you know that that's not going to make him popular with his brothers. Some Jewish rabbis have said over the centuries that it was this tattletaling of Joseph that became the determining factor for the types of troubles that he would find himself in down the road. Now, Israel loved Joseph more than any of his other children because he was the son of his old age, and he had made him a long robe with sleeves. Now, I want to apologize in advance for ruining many of your favorite parts of the story. Unfortunately, and with apologies to Donny Osmond, the amazing Technicolor dream coat, the coat of many colors, did not technically exist. Martin Luther, the 16th century German reformer who followed the Greek version of the Old Testament known as the Septuagint and the Latin version known as the Vulgate, he was the first one to call it the coat of many colors. And then the good old King James Bible came along and added that and used that phrase as well. But unfortunately, the Hebrew words kethonet pasim has nothing to do with colors. It literally means a long robe with sleeves. Now, it was still a very luxurious and distinctive garment, but not a coat of many colors. I said this at the first service, and my younger brother Andy texted me back in between services and said, I don't know, Jim, Joseph and the probably not Technicolor long sleeve robe just doesn't have the same ring as a coat of many colors. So it is what it is. Needless to say, the coat, the robe, still ticked off his brothers. But when his brothers saw that their father had loved him more than all of his brothers, they hated him and could not speak peaceably to him. Their anger is so great, the storyteller tells us, they cannot speak peaceably to the little twit. As Michael William puts it, that is, they couldn't greet him with the customary and expected shalom, peace be with you. One can hardly blame them. So now it's time to hit pause for just a moment and reflect on where we are in the story. We see this triangle of love and hate between Jacob and Joseph and the rest of his brothers. And we think that if we're honest, we can probably connect at one point or another with each of those touch points, right? The times that we either have been the ones loved too much, or perhaps we have loved too much, or quite possibly we're the ones, in all honesty, that felt loved too little. Somehow, some way, the great promises made to Abraham is going to survive in this triangular powder keg of family dynamics. And then Joseph does this. Verse 5. Once Joseph had a dream, and when he told it to his brothers, they hated him even more. He said to them, listen to this dream that I dreamed. There we were, binding sheaves in the field. Suddenly my sheaf rose and stood upright, and then your sheaves gathered around it and bowed down to my sheaf. His brother said to him, Are you indeed to reign over us? Are you indeed to have dominion over us? So they hated him even more because of his dreams and because of his words. Now we're going to come back to dreams over and over again in this Joseph saga. And unbeknownst to just about every player in this drama except God, these first two dreams are going to lay out God's purposes for Joseph and how the whole story is going to unfold. Now, none of them, not even Joseph, really understand what these dreams mean at this moment and what they're dealing with. The storyteller lets us know that the dreamer, Joseph, is far too eager to share his nocturnal visions. I mean, right from the start, before we even know what the dreams are, we're told that his brothers hated him even more because of these dreams. So, dream number one, we're out working in the field, says Joe. We're binding sheaves of grain when all of a sudden my sheaf stands up and all of yours bows down to mine. You know the expression, someone doesn't know how to read the room? I'm thinking that's Joseph right here, right? When your brothers already hate you, this is not what's going to get you back in their good graces, right? Verse 9. And he had another dream, and he told to his brothers, saying, look, I've had another dream. The sun, the moon, and 11 stars were bowing down to me. But when he told it to his father and to his brothers, his father rebuked him and said to him, what kind of dream is this that you've had? Shall we indeed come, I and your mother and your brothers, and bow down to the ground before you? Evidently not one to leave well enough alone. Sometime later, Joseph rushes out to tell them his latest and greatest dream. But this doesn't focus on some measly sheaves of grain. No. We've got the sun, the moon, and the stars bowing down to Joseph. That's how you kick your dreams up a notch to make a point with your family. This time, dear old dad gets in on the action. We're told that he rebukes Joseph in the dream. Michael Williams says that the Hebrew word for rebuke is a very strong word. In fact, amongst the various places it's used in the Old Testament, it's used in Psalm 106 for God to describe how God spoke and drove the waters back when the Israelites crossed through the Red Sea on dry ground. So the amount of force that could hold back water is the type of word, the strong word that Joseph's father is using to push back his favorite son. Of course, we know that the saga will play out exactly as the dreams have foretold it right now. But at this point in the story, our leading character is portrayed as an arrogant, overly indulged teenager who seems to be completely obsessed with himself, clueless to his impact on the family, and believes that the entire world revolves around him. Walter Brueggemann says, he probably got it from his father, right? From Jacob. Jacob has taught his son to dream from the very start. Brueggemann envisions that Jacob has evoked in Joseph's life a sense of being bound for something more and something better than the competence of his older brothers. The last must dream. And Jacob comes from that being the last in his family as well. But dreams, as they come, they also bring consequences. They cause conflict. And Joseph's dreams now threaten his brothers and the plans that they have for their family. So we finish this section with one final verse, verse 11. So his brothers were jealous of him, but his father kept the matter in his mind. Now the brothers obviously see this spark of a dream as a threat to them. Jealousy forms. In fact, not just jealousy, we may say that the seeds of murder begin to take root right here in these dreams. They're the older ones. They're the ones in positions of power. They have the things that they want in their life, and they have things working just as they want them to. Joseph's dreams start to threaten the status quo. Now, there's more to come in this drama, right? We know that, but the brothers don't know that. They can't see that. Dad, on the other hand, despite rebuking his son, at least holds out the possibility that there may be something to that. And it says that he kept the matter in his mind. Sometimes when things seem so outrageous and impossible, we may do well to not just dismiss it entirely, but hold on to it and see if down the road God gives some kind of confirmation about these crazy and outlandish ideas. Verse 12. Now his brothers went to pasture their father's flock near Shechem. And Israel said to Joseph, "Are not your brothers pasturing the flock at Shechem? Come, I will send you to them." And he answered, "Here I am." So he said to him, "Now go and see if it is well with your brothers and with the flock, and bring word back to me." So he sent Joseph from the valley of Hebron. So dad sends his favorite son on what we can only assume is another spying mission, right? In fact, the Hebrew phrase, "see if it is well with your brothers," is Jacob's way of asking whether there is shalom with the brothers, but we already know from the narrator they would not speak peace, shalom, to their brother at all. And he doesn't know it now, but Jacob, in effect, is sending his favorite son Joseph to his death. Joseph travels some 60 miles from Hebron to Shechem, and the only problem is when he gets there, the brothers are nowhere to be found, neither they nor the family flocks. Verse 14 to 17. Joseph came to Shechem, and a man found him wandering in the fields. The man asked him, "What are you seeking?" "I'm seeking my brothers," he said. "Please tell me where they are pasturing the flock." And the man said, "Oh, they have gone far away. I've heard them say, 'Let us go to Dothan.'" So Joseph went after his brothers, and he found them at Dothan. An unidentified man, was he a random stranger, or was he planted there by the brothers? We don't know. But he tells Joseph to move forward further to Dothan. Now, Dothan is another 8 miles north, and Joseph is getting further and further away from his father's protection, as we're about to see. Verse 18. They saw him from a distance, and before he came near to them, they conspired to kill him. They said to one another, "Here comes this dreamer. Come, Now let us kill him and throw him in one of the pits, and then we shall say that a wild animal has devoured him, and we shall see what becomes of his dreams. I mean, even before they find out what it is that he's coming to say to them or to ask them or to give them, the brothers hatch a deadly plan to kill him. We'll just kill him and throw him into a pit. There's enough wild animals out here to make it look like an accident. Verse 21. But when Reuben heard it, he delivered him out of their hands, saying, "Let us not take his life." Reuben said to them, "Shed no blood. Throw him into this pit here in the wilderness, but lay no hand upon him, that he might rescue him out of their hand and restore him to his father." So when Joseph came to his brothers, they stripped him of his robe, his long robe with sleeves that he wore, and they took him and threw him into a pit. The pit was empty. There was no water in it. Big brother Reuben, the part that I played in Technicolor Dreamcoat, steps in and talks his brother into a lesser evil. Let's just dump him into the pit without killing him. Now, I would like to think that being the oldest and the wisest, that the brother saw the folly of his younger brothers and out of the goodness of his heart was wanting to do something to save the young lad. That the narrator says he has alternative motives, right? He wants to rescue Joseph and return him to his dad. So that's got to be what it is, right? Well, except remember in the beginning, all the brothers hated him, even Reuben. So we got to look back to chapter 35. And there's a single verse that might sound shocking at first, but shed light on what actually took place and what Reuben's motivations here. So, as I mentioned before, the 12 sons of Jacob were born to 4 different moms. Jacob's favorite wife, Rachel, was mom to both Joseph and Benjamin, the 2 youngest of all. Unfortunately, Rachel died while giving birth to Benjamin. Well, in the aftermath of that tragedy, the narrator tells us that Reuben, the oldest, slept with Bilhah. Now, Bilhah was Rachel's maid and a mother to Dan and Naphtali, 2 more of the brothers. Scholars suggest this wasn't some kind of sexual attraction between the 2, but rather it was a power play by Reuben. In order to do that, to assert his control and become the new head of the family. Well, it didn't work. Jacob continued to remain the head of the family, and now evidently Reuben needs a way to try to get back into his father's good graces. So what better than to take his favorite son out of the jaws of death and bring him home to be reunited with dear old dad. Verse 25. Then they sat down to eat, the brothers. And looking up, they saw a caravan of Ishmaelites coming from Gilead with their camels carrying gum, balm, and resin on their way to carry it down to Egypt. Then Judah said to his brothers, "What profit is it if we kill our brother and conceal his blood? Come, let us sell him to the Ishmaelites and not lay our hands on him, for, he is our brother and our own flesh." And his brothers agreed. When some Midianite traders passed by, they drew Joseph up, lifting him out of the pit, and they sold him to the Ishmaelites for 20 pieces of silver. And they took Joseph to Egypt. So Judah, who's number 4 son in terms of pecking order, comes up with an idea. He sees some traveling traders moving through, and he says, why kill the little jerk when we can make a little money off of him? And so they all agree, but in this wonderful twist of fate, before they can finish their meal and go back and get their brother out of the pit, some other traders, Midianites, wander by. They see the teenager in the pit. They pick him up and think, hey, let's sell him as a slave, and they get the money. The Midianites do, not the brothers. 20 pieces of silver was the going rate for a slave that day, approximately $200 today. Money exchanges hands, and Joseph is whisked away before his brothers even know that he's gone. Verse 29. When Reuben returned to the pit and saw that Joseph was not in the pit, he tore his clothes. He returned to his brothers and said, "The boy is gone, and where can I turn now?" And just like that, Reuben loses the one opportunity he had to get back into his father's good graces. He is crushed. But as a parting gift, at least they took that dastardly robe off before they threw him in the pit. So they've got that, and they can tie up the one loose end by going back and talking to dad. Verse 31. Then they took Joseph's robe, slaughtered a goat, dipped the robe into the blood, and they had the long robe with sleeves taken to their father, and they said, this we have found. See whether it is your son's robe or not. And Jacob recognized it and said, it is my son's robe. A wild animal has devoured him. Joseph is without doubt torn to pieces. So this garment, which began as a gift of love, then became the source of envy and jealousy. It was a symbol of hatred between the brothers, is now being used as a tool of deception to their father. What a journey for one piece of fabric. The brothers don't even have to offer up an alibi to their father. They just place this ripped up and bloodied garment before their father and says, I don't know, does this look familiar, Dad? Have you seen this before? Of course, they've all seen it. He's wearing it all the time, over and over again. And of course, Jacob takes the bait and he runs with it. My son has been killed by wild animals, he laments. Verse 34, then Jacob tore his garments and he put sackcloth on his loins and he mourned for his son for many days. All his sons and daughters sought to comfort him, but he refused to be comforted and said, no, I shall go down to Sheol to my death, to my son mourning. Thus his father bewailed him. Meanwhile, the Midianites had sold him in Egypt to Potiphar, one of Pharaoh's officials, the captain of the guard. So Jacob is crushed. First, his wife, his favorite wife, Rachel, dies during childbirth, and now his favorite son, her eldest, follows in her footsteps, or so he's led to believe. Dismembered and devoured by wild beasts, probably lions and tigers and bears. Oh my. He's unconsolable. What a horrible thing for brothers to do to each other and for brothers to do to their father. Now, while Jacob is being shown his son's tattered and bloody robe, this is the journey that Joseph is making. The red and the blue lines going down to Egypt, that's the route the Ishmaelites traders took from Dothan down to Egypt. And where is their newly purchased slave going to be sold? Will it be to work on some of the great Egyptian building projects or maybe to labor tirelessly in the quarries? No. He's going to be the household slave to a rich and powerful man named Potiphar, who's the captain in Pharaoh's guard. So that's where we're going to leave our self-absorbed teenager, not quite hero for the day. And it's quite a colorful start to this epic saga, don't you think? Now, one of the aspects that hits us right from the start is how God appears to be in the background of this drama, not in the foreground. I mean, we know, we've come to believe that the dreams were from God, and we know that Jacob's family is the heir to the promise that was made by God to Abraham. But we don't see a lot of God working in the forefront of the story, do we? I think it's only later, when everything resolves itself, that we're able to go back and see, so that's where God was in all of this. One of the reasons that scholars think this is such a powerful story for the Israelites was that the Israelite people in antiquity often struggled the same way. They struggled to find, where is God in the midst of all of the ups and downs that are happening in our lives? Many of the future kings of Israel did not follow the ways of God. The Babylonian captivity in the 6th century BC was catastrophic for the people of Israel. Their temple was destroyed by a foreign superpower. The best and the brightest of them were carried away and forced to live 70 years in a foreign land. And even once they returned to Israel, they struggled for centuries to try to find their own autonomy, eventually being occupied by the great Roman Empire during the time of Jesus. So can you see how a story like this, where God is working behind the scenes, could be inspiring and encouraging to the people of God, despite everything looking to the contrary? I dare say that it's also where we might be able to catch hold of the story as well. And whether we find ourselves siding with the dad who loves too much, or the brothers who seem to be coming up on the short end of the love stick, or the chosen one who, despite being loved, has all sorts of disasters happen over and over in his life. As we think about our own lives and what the ups and downs have been, we may come to discover that, God has also been there with us, behind the scenes, working along the way, and we didn't always see it when it was happening. Who knows? We may know the eventual outcome of this saga, especially if you're paying attention to the beginning when I kind of gave you the whole plot line, or if you're a fan of Joseph and the Amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat. But I imagine that the biblical story might just have a few surprises up its long sleeve robe. And I'm excited to see where that'll go in the next 6 weeks. And all God's people said, Amen.